All right, guys. So let's take a look at those FRQs. These are the FRQs from the lecture I was going to do. I just didn't want to have the lecture of 45 minutes and then the FRQs on top of it. Sometimes when you have long videos that you upload to YouTube, they get stuck in processing. So, boom, here we go. 2009. Assume the United States economy is in long-run equilibrium. So our current equilibrium, our QE, is at our QY with an expected inflation rate of 6%, okay, an unemployment rate of 5%, okay, and a nominal interest rate of 8%. Awesome. All right. So this is very similar to the FRQ we did back in class, where we set up a Phillips curve with the relevant data. And wait for it. Looks like that's what we're doing for A. Using a correctly labeled graph with both a short run and long run Phillips curve and the relevant information above, show the current long run equilibrium as point A. All right. So let's get this here. On our y-axis, we have inflation. Down here, we have unemployment. Short run Phillips curve. Long run Phillips curve. They said that our economy is in long run equilibrium. QE is QY, which is the same as being right there. So we're good. We know that our unemployment rate is 5%, and we're on our long run equilibrium. So natural rate is usually 4 to 6%. In this case, they're saying that we're at 5, so that makes sense because long run equilibrium lives below long run Phillips curve, and our expected inflation rate is 6%. 6%. So there's our point A. And then it says calculate the real interest rate in the long run. All right, so what do we know about real interest rates? So a real interest rate is our nominal interest rate minus inflation. So what information do we know right now? Our inflation rate is 6% and our nominal interest rate is 8%. So our nominal interest rate, 8%. Our inflation was 6%. So my real interest rate is 2%. C. Assume that the Federal Reserve decides to target an inflation rate of 3%. What open market operation should the Federal Reserve undertake? Whoa. Okay. So I got a baby moving in the background. Assume, what's that? 3%. Currently, their inflation rate is 6%. They want to target a 3% inflation rate, which means they want our new point. Oh, that was supposed to be called A for part A. They want some new point over here. Now, what are we doing with that? We're increasing unemployment and we're decreasing our price level. So this would be a contractionary monetary policy. So contractionary monetary policy, I've got some options. I can do a couple things. I use the acronym RBLL. Oh, whoops, that's expansionary. ISRR. So in a contractionary monetary policy, which I screwed myself up already, I want to increase the interest rates. And to do that, I can sell bonds, I can raise the reserve requirement, or I can raise the discount rate. So in this case, what open market operation should I do? I want to sell bonds. We can check our acronym against the other thing I like to do with bonds. If you sell, small. So if I want to contract the economy, sell bonds, small. And that's from the Federal Reserve's point of view. If the Fed sells bonds, they are giving a bank money, giving the bank a bond, and they're taking out their excess reserves, limiting their ability to increase the money supply over time. All right. D. Using a correctly labeled graph of the money market, show how the Federal Reserve's action you identified in Part C will affect the nominal interest rate. So our money market graph has our, it's our nominal interest rate here, and our quantity of money here, money demand, and money supply. We're selling bonds, we're making the money supply smaller. So we went from interest rate at equilibrium to interest rate 1. We increased the money, we decreased the money supply by increased the interest rate. All right. How will the interest rate you identified in part D affect aggregate demand in the short run? Explain. All right. So part E, since we increased the interest rate, consumers are less likely to take out a loan and borrow money, so aggregate demand would shift to the left. Businesses would also be less likely to take out a loan to spend that money, so aggregate demand would shift to the left. So how would I answer that question? I would say that aggregate demand would shift to the left in the short run because at higher interest rates, consumers and businesses are less likely to take out a loan and spend the money in the economy. Okay, F. Assume the Federal Reserve action is successful. Is successful. What will happen to each of the following as the economy approaches a new long-run equilibrium? All right, so this is going to be a long-run problem, and this is a tough one because we have to think about long run. So we initially started out here, right? This location is the same as A. That's where we started. And then the Fed decided to target that 3% inflation, right? So they put in a contractionary fiscal policy. They decreased aggregate demand because they increased the interest rates. So C and I dropped, AD went to the left. We entered a recession because the Fed wanted to drop inflation. So we are now in a recession. In the long run, so it says what's going to happen to each of the following as the economy approaches a new long-run equilibrium. And they want to know about the short-run Phillips curve. Okay, so we know that if we're in a recession, price levels are going to fall. In the long run, wages and resource prices are going to fall in the long run. So AS shifts to the right. So now we have a PL2. So price level decreased and our output increased. And we can always remember from those cheat sheets that if our output increases, the only thing that we can really change in the long run, in the short run, that's happening right here, is our employment has to go up. So price level went down, employment went up. We're right here. My price level went down, so my inflation decreased. If my employment went up, my unemployment went down. And I'm intersecting the line, so I have to intersect the line, down and left. So my newest point would be somewhere over here, short run Phillips curve 1. So the short run Phillips curve would shift left. Why? Because wages and resource prices fall in the long run. And when we're in a recession, wages and resource prices are going to fall. So there is our F right there. That was a, oh, sorry, that's not our F. There's one more. What's going to happen to the natural rate of unemployment? Not a darn thing. It is always going to be in the same spot. Our natural rate of unemployment, 4 to 6%. Cool. So that was 2009. You got the answer keys on there as well that you guys can check out. Okay, so this is B, so a makeup exam. This one says country Z has a required reserve ratio of 10%. Let me get my data up here. Required reserve at 10%. Assume that the central bank sells 50 million in government securities on the open market. A central bank is the same as a Fed. Central bank equals Fed. We don't have to always be so American centric. If we were living in Europe, the EU, they have their own central bank. Every country has its central bank. So don't be confused when you see central bank. If the central bank is selling bonds, well, we know sell equals small. So this is a contractionary monetary policy. All right. And what else can we determine from all this good stuff? Ooh, if the required reserve ratio is 10%, that means my money multiplier is 1 over 0.1, or my money multiplier is 10. So now that I've got everything kind of figured out, let's take a look at what's going to happen with A. Calculate each of the following. The total change in reserves in the banking system. So the Fed sells 50 million worth of bonds. Where'd my bond go? So they got this. The Fed has this, and banks, there we are. Why am I confused? All right. So the Fed has a bond. They're going to sell it to banks. The banks have to buy this with their excess reserves. But we're not asking about required or excess. They just want to know what's the total change in reserves in the banking system. You had to pay for that bond. You had to pay for it with your reserves. So the total change in the reserves of the banking system is just going to be $50 million because it was bought with their reserves. Oh, sorry, that was A with a little I. What's going on with the number II? What's the maximum possible change in the money supply? Now we're talking about hit it with a multiplier. So the equation we use is our total change in our money supply equals our initial change times our multiplier. So these banks are losing 50 million worth of excess reserves, or just reserves, and excess reserves, that's where they're buying it from. So they're losing all that money that they could be loaning out to other banks. Our money multiplier is 10. So our total change is 500. Is it million or billion? Who cares? 500 million over time. All right. Using a correctly labeled graph of the money market, show the impact of central bank's bond on the nominal interest rate. So sell small. Okay. So C. We have our nominal interest rate. Definitely write nominal interest rate on the AP exam. Don't just be Mr. Owen and abbreviate everything. Money demand, money supply. We sold bonds, sell small. We're doing a contractionary monetary policy. Our monetary policy is a tight monetary policy. We started out with an equilibrium, and the interest rate at equilibrium, and is increased because we decreased the money supply. Did they ask us to explain? Nope. All right. D, as a result of the price level change in part C, people with fixed income, are they going to be better off, worse off, or unaffected? So price level change. If this happened, interest rates go up. If interest rates go up, it's a contractionary fiscal policy. Let's just assume we're chilling at equilibrium right here with AS, AD, long run aggregate supply, price level, and GDP. When the Fed does this, by doing a contractionary monetary policy, they increased interest rates. Interest rates went up, which means consumers bought less, borrowed less and spent less, businesses borrowed less and spent less, and that means aggregate demand is going to shift to the left. Aggregate demand shifts to the left, and that dropped our price level. Since our price level went down, that means inflation went down. If you're living on a fixed income and there's deflation, well, you're better off because now the money you have in your pocket is going to be worth more. It'll have higher purchasing power. So I would say that people with fixed incomes are going to be better off because of the dropping price level. The purchasing power of the currency owned by people with fixed income is going to increase. All right, let's keep this party going. Give me a squiggle before I turn the page. There it is. Oh, I lost it. Focus. Yes. All right, last one. This it's weird. This is another 2009. This must have been a smaller one from 2009, one of the short ones. Assume the required reserve ratio is 20%. Let's get that on there. So required reserve ratio is 20%, which is going to tell me that my money multiplier is 1 over 0.2, or it's just going to be 5. That's the biggest 5 I've ever drawn. Assume that Kim, hi Kim, deposits $100 in cash from her pocket into her checking account. Calculate each of the following. Okay, so this is totally a short answer question. What's the maximum dollar amount the commercial bank can initially lend? Well, Kim puts $100 into the bank. The bank's got to put it in 2 spots. They can put it in the required reserve, and they can put it in the excess reserve. She's putting $100 in at 20%. They need to keep $20 in the bank, and excess reserves will be 80. So part I, my dollar amount that this bank can initially make is just going to be 80 bucks. What is the maximum total change in the demand deposits in the banking system? All right, so that one's different than the maximum change in the money supply. They're saying what's going to happen to the total demand deposits. This is a demand deposit. So if we want to know our total change, it's always going to be your initial change times your multiplier. Sorry, total change in checkable deposits, or they call it demand deposits. So we'll say we'll just call this my initial deposit. So my initial deposit was $100. My multiplier is 5. So we have just got 500 bucks. That's what's going to happen to all the demand deposit accounts in the economy. That's different than our increase in the money supply, which is our last one, the maximum change in the money supply. With the maximum change in the money supply, if I want to know my total change in money supply, it's my initial new loans times my money multiplier. So my initial new loans is 80 bucks. That comes out of excess reserves. So 80 bucks times my multiplier of 5 is going to give me $400. Oh, there's already a dollar sign. Oh, money, money. This is going to give me my total change in the money supply in our economy. All right, B. That's a lot of A for a short question. Maybe I'm just talking a lot. Let's do B over here. I don't want to turn the page and risk it. Assume the Federal Reserve buys $5 million in government bonds in the open market. As a result of the open market purchase, calculate the maximum increase in the money supply in the banking system. All right, money supply. So if they buy bonds, we don't have to deal with any of this, right? Because it's not going into the checkable deposits. When you buy a bond, it goes straight into the excess reserves because the Fed is not putting money into the bank. They're buying an asset from the bank. So it's getting exchanged from being an asset recorded in your T-chart to a excess reserve in your T-chart. So if the Fed buys 5 million, they bought 5 million and our money multiplier is 5, then the total change in the money supply is going to just be 25 million bucks. Cool. And then given the increase in the money supply, what happens to real wages in the short run? All right, so the Fed bought all these bonds. This is where they're really checking your knowledge here. The Fed bought all these bonds, right? You don't have to draw this, by the way, I'm just doing it for us. This is my nominal interest rate. It's my quantity of money. They bought the bonds. So interest rates went down. If interest rates go down, consumers are going to borrow money. Businesses are going to borrow money. They're both going to spend that money. And we know that aggregate demand goes to the right. So if we were originally sitting at equilibrium or wherever we were, AD, AS, long run aggregate supply, we have price level, we have GDP. If the Fed decided to increase the money supply, dropping the interest rates, that brings aggregate demand to the right. So AD goes to AD1, and we can see that drove up our price level. So if price level goes up, that's the same as inflation going up. So what happens to real wages in the short run? Our real wages are going to go down. Why? Because a real wage equals your nominal wage minus inflation. So let's say my nominal wage was $100 and inflation was 5%. That means my real wage somewhere around here, 95. But if we're going to increase aggregate demand, by increasing aggregate demand, we drove the price level up and my inflation went, hey, chicken head, get over here. Inflation went up to 10%. Come here, chicken baby. Inflation went up to 10%. So now, if my nominal wage is $100, hello, little chicken head. If my nominal wage is $100 and inflation is 10%, well, my real wage has gone down. Hey, can you say something? Say, chicken baby!
Chicken baby!
Chicken baby! You want to say anything else? You want to say, hi, friends?
Hi, friends.
Use your hand.
Hi, friends.
Hi, friends. All right, say bye-bye, friends.
Bye-bye, friends.
Bye-bye, you.